Shalom TV's exclusive television coverage of Israel in Turmoil is made possible in part by Barbara and Arthur Wernicke, Gwen and Ken Asher, Edith Sammers and Ed Smith, Mimi and Saul Cohen, Eleanor and Mort Lowenthal, and Dr. Naomi Vilko, MD.
I'm Mark Golub. Thank you again for joining us as we continue Shalom TV's exclusive television coverage of Israel in turmoil, as Israel continues its defensive action in Gaza in an attempt to bring Hamas rocket fire and tunnel invasion to an end in Operation Protective Edge. Let's take a quick look at some of the events that have transpired of late. Israel is now saying that an errant shell hit the UN facility in which people were seeking refuge from Israeli missile strikes, but that Hamas had fired at Israel from the nearby buildings and that the compound courtyard had been free of civilians when the errant shell hit. Another school was hit today, and Israel is claiming it was hit by a Hamas rocket that went off course. Israel did agree to a humanitarian ceasefire and stopped all of its military activities, but Hamas fired at Israel during the ceasefire, and Israel then resumed its operation. And on the diplomatic front, late today in Israel, Secretary of State John Kerry revised his ceasefire proposal, which the Israeli cabinet had rejected because it did not address Hamas rockets and tunnels. But now, Kerry is saying that the disarmament of Hamas and all terrorist groups in Gaza is necessary for any negotiation process aiming to resolve the ongoing conflict with Israel in a lasting and meaningful way. In Israel, there's been some rather hard-hitting responses to the way Secretary of State John Kerry and the Obama administration has been subtly criticizing Israel. And one of the most direct pieces was published Sunday by one of the foremost columnists in the Jewish world today, Izzy Liebler, who writes for the Jerusalem Post and for those who read him online. And Izzy's piece on Sunday was provocatively entitled, "President Obama Abandons Israel." And joining us on our phones from Jerusalem right now is Izzy Liebler. Izzy, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for joining us again on Shalom TV.
Good to speak to you, Mark.
First, Izzy, how are things in Jerusalem tonight, as you see them?
Look, it's a somber day today because we had 5 casualties.
Yes.
And in this particular context, we thought we were moving towards some sort of clarification, but there is none. And it's quite clear from the statement that the Prime Minister has made that we've got to sit this out and we've got to fight through to this until we get rid of these tunnels and the threat against Israel is overcome. The morale of the people, despite the sadness and the funerals which are taking place, because each one of these funerals is as though it's one of our own for the whole country, despite all of this, the morale in the country is solid, and I would say 80 to 90% of the people in all the polls indicate that they want to go on with this and not face another repeat of this again in 12 months' time.
It is remarkable, Izzy. We've seen similar incursions into Gaza to try to stop Hamas in the past. And, when Israeli soldiers die and are wounded seriously, it does, as you say, it's like members of your own family. And very often the Israeli public turns on any action and withdraws its support when they see young Israelis dying. What seems to be true in this case, and it's what you've now alluded to, is that there was overwhelming sentiment in Israel before the operation began that it was necessary. And what you're telling us tonight is that despite the casualties, your sense is the Israeli people remain as strongly in support of the operation as they did before it began. Do I have it correct?
Not entirely. I think that they're much more strongly in support of it than when we started. Because when we started, we did not realize the extent of what we were facing and what Hamas had in store for us had we not discovered these tunnels and taken the action. And I think there's a determination today which is much stronger than before. Despite the casualties, there's a determination that this is a national issue and our national survival is at stake. We cannot go through this every year and deal with these people in this manner, because these are not people we're dealing with. We're dealing with barbarians of the worst order.
Mm-hmm. By the way, how has the Israeli public responded to the fact that we now know, you now know, about this elaborate tunnel network, which evidently has come as a surprise to Israel and the Israeli public?
I think that's one of the things, Mark, that when we have postmortems afterwards, there'll be a lot of questions asked, but at the moment we're looking to the future. But indeed, a lot of us are saying, how could we have got to a stage to be caught by surprise as we were?
Yes.
We knew there were tunnels, but we had no idea of the extent. Mm-hmm. We certainly did not anticipate that these tunnels would open up virtually in the dining rooms of kibbutzim, and that we could face a situation which would have amounted to the equivalent of another 9/11 if they would have succeeded.
Yes. Okay, Izzy, so why do you title your recent piece, President Obama Abandons Israel? And obviously I'm putting emphasis on the word abandons. Some of the people who have talked to me about the piece understood many of the things you said, but they questioned whether you meant to suggest that the President of the United States has indeed abandoned Israel. So talk about that for a moment.
We feel, or many of us feel, in fact, for the first time, it's over the entire political fulcrum seems to reflect this, left as well as right, that the U.S. has let us down. We are not being treated as an ally. Worse than that, President Obama, from the day one, went through what I would call the mantras of saying that we have the right to defend ourselves, but from day one tried to stop us from taking action of invading, and then when we did, played up the issue of the casualties on the other side without putting them in the perspective. And he set the tone, which the rest of the world followed up. And we feel deeply let down, because we know that Americans in this situation would have acted much more vigorously than we have and not taken the steps. In fact, nobody would have taken the steps to try to avoid civilian casualties to the extent that we did. We went through everything, and I mean, quite a few of our soldiers' lives could have been saved had we not had this attitude. Mm-hmm. But to find ourselves in a situation where the president sets the tone. After all, this is not a question of him being a mediator between two countries. We're talking about Israel, the ally of the United States. Israel and the Jewish people who have much in common with the American people. And the other side are a bunch of terrorists and regarded as terrorists, murderous cutthroats that are willing to sacrifice their own children as well as our own in order to obtain their objective. And their objective is not self-determination. Their objective is the destruction of Israel and the killing of Jews as is incorporated in their charter. Now, the president should, in my opinion, and the United States, we would expect the United States to be quite explicit here of where right and wrong is, because this is a battle of black and white. It's a battle of evil against good, and Americans understand the difference. Even if Europeans today have reached such a situation with moral relativism that they don't recognize the difference anymore, I know that Americans do. Mm-hmm. And one would have expected the American president to behave otherwise. But the final, what I call a betrayal, and I'm sorry to speak in such terrible language because it's been withdrawn to such an extent, but for the Secretary of State to go to two states which are actually the main supporters of Hamas, yes, one of which funded Hamas, one of which funds ISIS, and I'm talking here about Kuwait. I'm talking about Qatar.
Qatar.
And Qatar.
Right.
Which is really the funder, outright funder, a Muslim Brotherhood outlet, which is despicable. To turn to them and to turn to Turkey, particularly in the context of the president of the Prime Minister of Turkey coming out with the anti-Semitic filth that he's been coming out with and virtually calling on pogroms to an extent against Jews, in this particular context, to kind of turn on the proposal was put up by the Egyptians, which we accepted. We accepted all the ceasefire proposals, but we accepted that one. And to turn to these people to act as intermediaries was, we felt, an act of betrayal. Now, they've gone backwards and they said there was a misunderstanding and diplomacy, but I'm not a diplomat and I'm a commentator, and I'm saying it was a dastardly act and they should be ashamed of themselves for having done this. And I'm glad and hope that they will have learned and go backwards and not continue on this track, because it is not in the interest of Israel, it's not in the interest of the United States, it's not in the interest of the Western world to behave in this manner. And that's strong words, I realize, and they come really with great sense of distress, because the United States to us is extraordinarily important. And the United States has been enormously important in enabling us to protect ourselves. The Iron Dome would not have been achieved had we not had the generous support, congressional and administration, of finance to enable us to build this dome, which saved so many Israeli civilians. So we just feel let down politically, deeply, deeply, deeply disillusioned.
Mm-hmm. You, by the way, are not speaking only for yourself, Izzy. We've seen a lot come out of Jerusalem and Israel, echoing your sentiment. The first piece I saw was yours. Then David Horowitz wrote in the Times of Israel also a scathing piece on Kerry. And my sense is that what you have expressed, it's not like every Israeli agrees with you, but it is in some way you're representing an overall sentiment within Israel that you're very disappointed. You use the word betrayal. Now you're talking about, Kerry and the administration taking a step back. So maybe you'd say you feel it's less betrayal now. But it was an enormous disappointment to you. And I believe you're expressing this sense of disappointment that many, many, many Israelis felt. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. I mean, you'll even find that people on the far left that were quite vigorous, all the Doves, the majority of Doves, I mean, you'll even find people in Haaretz coming out with similar sentiments. Yes. So that does suggest that, the political divide is overcome. Look, Israel today is more united than we've ever been. Yes. And with all the dislike and opposition to Netanyahu, there's a general consensus that he's done an extraordinarily good job. He's been restrained, he's avoided demagoguery, and he's done the diplomacy to the extent he can. I mean, for him to maneuver in the context of what happened the last few days and still keep an open, he's got to keep an open door there with America. He must maintain a relationship with the Americans. To be able to do that, it's quite a balancing act, and we're all very pleased he's done that. Look, he immediately accepted ceasefires. Yes. And all the ceasefires have been broken. Yes. And to turn to us and tell us to have an unconditional ceasefire while we're being shot at, it's insanity. Yes. And we certainly cannot continue to live in a situation where we're going to have terrorists next door and know that their objective is to destroy us and not take out what it is. Our objective is, and I think it's clear, you'll find that Israel will say, yes, we're willing to listen to all the economic openings for Gaza. We're willing to open up everything on one condition, one clear condition, total demilitarization and an assurance by supervision that they don't build up again. Then everything will be opened up to them and they can have a Marshall Plan for the area. There's a lot of people have suggested, and which we would support.
We're going to come back to that in one moment. Right now, Izzy, I just want to know if you have any sense from Jerusalem of how the international media is reporting on Operation Protective Edge.
Look, it depends which media you're looking at. If you talk about the New York Times, and if you talk about the Guardian, in fact, if you talk about much of the European press, it is appalling because they are showing these shots of Arab kids being butchered in a manner which is not in context. They are not demonstrating or pointing out the fact that in many cases these were being used deliberately as human shields. They were not showing that these people were told to stay where they were. They're not putting the context of how we tried desperately to give them warnings. And this is the result. Each of these people, each of these tragic circumstances, because none of us like seeing this sort of thing, each of these circumstances is a consequence of Hamas trying. Hamas has one objective: kill as many Jews as possible. But if you can't kill Jews, make as many of our own people get killed, because that way we'll win a political battle. And unfortunately, this is what I'm saying is clear-cut. It's exactly what their options are. And they are murderers, not only attempting to kill us, but they are murdering their own people. And they are barbarians of the worst order. Mm-hmm. And that's another reason why I would have expected the world to be a little bit more understanding of us, because we can't just stand by with folded hands. And the answer that I've given to everybody that says proportionality, I say to them, tell me what you would do if a few thousand rockets were coming down on Paris or on London, or let's say even New York from a neighboring county. Would you just say proportionality and try to do one by one? And if you're not, and if we're lucky enough not to have our own people killed, we have to apologize for that. Mm-hmm. Because if they were successful, we'd have thousands of Israelis in their rockets.
That's right. I have to say, Izzy, in the United States, the media coverage has been very troubling to me. And many news agencies are talking about, again, the enormous force of power that Israel is using, and the destruction of entire sections of Gaza City, and that more than now 1,000 Palestinians have died. And on American television yesterday, a Palestinian spokesperson, you know her well, Hanan Ashrawi, made the claim that Hamas rocket fire doesn't justify Israelis killing more than 1,000 Palestinians. I want to play a very brief clip for our audience, and then I want you to respond. Here's Ashrawi yesterday on Fox News Sunday morning. Let's play that clip. Shalom.
If you were to stop the rocket attacks, which attack Israeli civilians and force them to run for bomb shelters, if you stop those, wouldn't the fighting end?
If Israel stops its occupation and its enslavement of the whole nation, its captivity of the people of Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, treating us like some subhuman species, then the violence will stop. The violence is generated by a very abnormal condition called the Israeli military occupation. They devalue our lives and rights. They persist in bombing and shelling people, civilians, and then they blame the victims.
Okay, Izzy, the Palestinian argument is that Israel is enslaving Palestinians who are trapped, imprisoned in Gaza, and this justifies Hamas's use of rockets and tunnels to fight against their enemy. What would you have us understand?
It's very difficult to respond to such an outright and obscene distortion of reality. The fact is, as you know, we left Gaza unilaterally. We pulled settlers and people out against their will. We had an enormous internal upheaval. What happened? They used the areas that we gave up, which were thriving farms, which could have been the beginning of a new agricultural development. They used that to build their tunnels and to plant their rockets and so on. And there is no Israeli supervision in Gaza. All we do is to ensure that the weapons, or try to ensure that the weapons, and we've been pretty poor at doing that, the weapons don't get in. Otherwise there'd be no blockade, and they could go and live their life if they would, as I said, if they were willing to demilitarize, there would be no problem. But there's not a question of demilitarizing, because these people have a clear objective, and that objective is not freedom, not anything. That objective is the destruction of us. And as the Charter says, killing as many Jews as possible everywhere. It says so in their Charter. They don't detract from it. And I can't understand how people can look at them and say that these are a reasonable, civilized group that should be treated with respect. They are barbarians of the worst order.
Do you feel, by the way, that the Israeli blockade imprisons Palestinians of Gaza?
Of course not. When you say blockade, they had the open doors with Egypt. Why turn to us? There's a huge border with Egypt. That's where their natural affinity should have been. And the Egyptians had to close up on them, because the Egyptians also found and considered them to be a dangerous element and closely in line with the Muslim brotherhood elements that were making terrorism to them.
Right,
it's a weird situation for us to find ourselves, to some extent, unofficially, on the same wavelength as Egypt. I mean, Egypt are not exactly friends of Israel.
Yes.
But we have a common interest here.
All right, only one more issue I just want you to speak to. You spoke earlier about how what this has shown is how dangerous it is to have this kind of enemy on the border of Israel. The obvious question that is being asked all over the American Jewish community is, what does this say about the realistic prospects for a two-state solution along the West Bank border? And my question for you is, number one, do you feel that this Hamas conflict makes it harder for Israel to imagine a peaceful resolution of the two-state solution and a situation where the Palestinians on the West Bank would live side by side with the State of Israel? And what about the fact that Netanyahu has made it more clear than ever that he wants Israeli military troops inside the West Bank, on the borders of the West Bank, specifically to address this kind of problem, and that only then would he be willing to even contemplate a two-state solution? I want to know your sense of Netanyahu's rather strong statement, and what does this do to your vision of the realism of a two-state solution?
I believe that from the day that Abbas made the pact with Hamas and they merged together, whilst that situation exists, there's absolutely nothing to discuss with them, because we're not going to encourage the creation of a state where one of the parties wants to destroy us and kill us. And there's a big question mark whether Abbas doesn't even go along with them. But be that as it is, and giving him the benefit of doubt. The second thing that comes out of all of this is that defensible borders are crucial. Mm-hmm. I mean, we cannot go back to the indefensible 1949 borders. And that's something that the Americans and the West will have to understand. We still are in favor of a two-state solution. Mm-hmm. We still don't want to rule over Palestinians. Mm-hmm. We still want to see the Palestinians ultimately at peace with us and running their own country. But we need two things. A, defensible borders, because we don't want to have what we are having on the Gaza border taking place in Tel Aviv, in the middle of the Habima Theatre, having tunnels. And we also want to avoid a situation in which we are completely surrounded by, well, put it this way, we need to have a military presence until such time as we're satisfied that we have a genuine peace. Mm-hmm. And that's a long way off. Yes. So, yes, there are a lot of obstacles, but I think, the eyes of a lot of people have been opened by this because they realize what could happen. Yes. It's always possible that Hamas could have taken over the West Bank as well if there were an independent state. Mm-hmm. And look where we would be. So security is our number one objective. Mm-hmm. And we will not move from that, irrespective of what the world demands of us. We've seen, Izzy, certain demonstrations, almost violent demonstrations on the West Bank in support of Hamas and Gaza. Does this undermine any sense that the Palestinians on the West Bank are somehow different than Hamas in Gaza? Well, you have to understand that the incitement and hatred that has been promoted by the Palestinian Authority differs only marginally from that of Hamas. The difference is that they have, as a tactic, avoided violence because they have rightly seen that they can achieve much more by diplomatic means than by terrorism. Mm-hmm. But that's the difference in terms of their ideological and intellectual upbringing. If you look at the mosques, if you look at the media, and if you look at the schools, it's exactly the same program as you have with Hamas, mm-hmm. with minor deviations. I mean, let's face it, when you have football fields and these people that come back who are mass murderers, elevated to national heroes, and when children are brought up to believe that the greatest objective in life, the greatest sanctification of life is to be a martyr and kill Jews. Now, they get that in the PA as well as in Hamas. This creates an atmosphere. But as I've always said, these are things that can be changed. The Nazis brainwashed the Germans, and if the Palestinian leaders have been brainwashing the Arabs, they can be de-brainwashed under the right circumstances the same way as the Germans were. There's nothing racially bad with Arabs. The Palestinians are the most talented of all the Arabs, and I still dream of the day, one day, when we can be at peace and work together with them.
Amen via amen. It's always wonderful to talk to you, Izzy, and I know it's late in Israel tonight, and you went out of your way to give me some time. I am most appreciative. You be well, and we'll talk from time to time. Love you dearly.
All the best to you.
Thank you. The thoughts of Izzy Liebler, a former leader of Australian Jewry, by the way, and now a superb columnist for the Jerusalem Post. And you can receive Izzy's column by email. Just Google Izzy Liebler or go to his blog at www.wordfromjerusalem.com. Well, one of the most important perspectives anyone can have in evaluating the potential for peace between Israel and the Palestinians concerns what the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas are saying in Arabic to their own people. One of the claims we often hear from those who oppose the two-state solution is that Mahmoud Abbas says one thing for American consumption in English, but says something very different in Arabic. And one of the most effective organizations monitoring what Palestinians are saying in Arabic is called Palestinian Media Watch, known as PMW, which is another website that you really want to read as often as you possibly can. PMW also studies Palestinian textbooks to see what Palestinian children are being taught about Israel and about Jews in general. And the founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch is Itamar Marcus. And I'm most pleased to have Itamar Marcus on our phones from, I believe, Efrat, Israel right now. Itamar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me. Good to be with you.
Itamar, are you in Efrat right now?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So, Itamar, I don't know how much you heard of Izzy Liebler's last comments, but, you know, people suggest that the current crisis is a battle between Israel and Hamas and other extreme jihadist groups in Gaza, but that it's not between Israel and the Palestinians who live on the West Bank, and it's not with Israel and the Palestinian Authority or Mahmoud Abbas, that they are not participating on Hamas's side. From your perspective, to what extent is this consistent with what is or is not being said in the Arabic language as you monitor it?
Well, the Palestinian Authority and Fatah have been going out of their way to give as much support, verbal and now also through violence, as much support as they can to Hamas. And if you need any proof, let me just give you an incredible example. Just from today, Fatah put a video clip on their official Facebook page. And the words that were on this clip were, "We swear to you that we will turn the beloved Gaza Strip into a graveyard for your soldiers, and we will turn Tel Aviv into a ball of fire, ball of fire, ball of fire." And then they had marching bands, and they showed missiles. It was, marching music. It was all about fighting Israel with missiles, and killing Israelis, and this was Fatah today.
And I'm sorry, Itamar, where was this?
This is on the official Facebook page of Fatah.
Of Fatah.
Headed by Mahmoud. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Fatah is headed by Mahmoud Abbas, who also heads the Palestinian Authority, which is supposed to be the moderates.
So what does this say to you, Itamar? And what should American Jews and Americans in general understand from the reality you just described?
We've been very careful during this entire war to send out press releases and bulletins, almost as many about Fatah as Hamas, because we want to make sure that the world, American Jewry, as well as leaders who are following our material, understand that just because Hamas is terrible, it does not mean that the Palestinian Authority is an honest peace partner, is an authentic peace partner. They have to prove it by their own actions, that they can be calling today for the burning of Tel Aviv tells us exactly where the Fatah is today in this conflict and in general. And by the way, this video clip, which they put on today, they already published in January of this year. They already published it when the war wasn't even going on. Fatah was calling to attack and burn Tel Aviv. They republished it now because of the war. So we have to understand that Hamas, as an Islamist radical organization, has a much worse reputation than the Palestinian Authority. They say in Arabic and English the same thing. The Palestinian Authority says very, very similar messages in Arabic, but in English they come across as the moderate, and the West, unfortunately, is only listening to the moderate message in English.
Mm-hmm. Itamar, I want you to shed some light, if you can, on a major discrepancy among those who discuss the two-state solution concerning Mahmoud Abbas. Some say he's a real partner for peace and he's fully in support of the concept of a two-state solution that includes a very limited right of Palestinian return to Israel, a demilitarized Palestinian state, and the right of Israelis to live on the West Bank so long as they accept living under Palestinian sovereignty. I want to take them one by one. First, from your perspective, as you see it, as you watch what's going on in the Arabic media, press, etc., is Mahmoud Abbas committed to the two-state solution and to living side by side with Israel in peace?
We judge Mahmoud Abbas not by what he tells the international community in English, but by what all of the frameworks that he controls tell the people in Arabic. And I'm talking about things like official Palestinian television, which is totally controlled by the PA and run under his own office. Now, let's give you an example. A few months ago, 3 weeks in a row, the most important children's program on Palestinian television taught young children that all of Israel was occupied Palestine. Jaffa and Haifa would return to them one day. And this was week in and week out, 3 weeks in a row. Now, when you're dealing with children at this age, this is a message that becomes a part of them. They're even too young to rationalize it, too young to think about it. We're talking about children on this program who are probably between 8 and 10 years old and maybe up to early teenage who are watching this. And the message is that there is no Israel and that everything is Palestine and only Palestine has a right to exist.
Mm-hmm. So is that your way of saying you feel Abbas does not tell his people in Arabic that he is committed to the two-state solution?
It's absolutely correct. We actually published a book which we called Deception. And in that book there are hundreds upon hundreds of examples just about this topic and about every topic that we really covered in the book. It shows that it's not just an isolated. I talked about 3 examples right now. Like I say, the book will have hundreds and hundreds of examples. We have leading Fatah members saying this officially on television. All of Palestine must return from we've had songs on Palestinian television many, many times in front of Mahmoud Abbas where they're singing about returning to Beit Shan and that Beit Shan will return to Palestine.
When did you publish that book, Itamar?
The book was published about 2 years ago. It's available on our website. It's available from Amazon. It's called Deception, Betraying the Peace Process.
And what is the name?
Deception, Betraying the Peace Process.
Okay. And what if somebody said to you, okay, Itamar, that was 2 years ago. Mahmoud Abbas has moved since then.
And then you'll find on our website hundreds of examples since then. In fact, there are so many examples we can't even that we find in the official media. We can't possibly put all of the examples on our website. It's just
okay.
And I want to say something so interesting. It's not just the message he gives. It's also the message that the people receive. And this is very important because the Washington Institute recently did a poll, and they asked Palestinians if they thought that the two-state solution, I don't remember the exact question, but they asked them if the two-state solution was a temporary solution which would lead eventually to Palestine taking over all of Israel. I think it was 65 or 70% agreed with that statement. And that's the message from Mahmoud Abbas, that they were going to go through a negotiating process, they're going to get what they can from Israel, but that essentially everything is Palestine, and eventually from those borders that they would have as a first stage of a Palestinian state, those borders would be impossible for Israel to defend, and eventually there would be a Palestinian state to replace all of Israel. That's the message of the Fatah and the Palestinian Authority.
Okay, let's take issue number 2, a demilitarized Palestine. Has Abbas said he would indeed accept Israeli forces on the interior borders of the Palestinian state, for example, in the Jordan Valley, which separates the Jordan River from the eastern edge of the West Bank? What's Abbas's stated position on Israeli soldiers in a demilitarized state?
His position is that he's completely against it. He's talked occasionally about having international soldiers there. But one of the great myths of any international agreement is that an independent state will remain demilitarized for any long term. This independent Palestinian state people want to create will have an airport. Airports can easily be a way to bring in shoulder missiles, which can shoot down airplanes. And as you know, Judea and Samaria is within a few kilometers of Israel's airport, Ben Gurion Airport. The dangers and the threats that could happen just from having airplanes bringing in missiles or whatever they would bring in is impossible. So demilitarization is great on paper. It is absolutely impossible to keep the Palestinian Authority demilitarized. Let me just give you an example. Gaza. Look at Gaza. Gaza has thousands and thousands and thousands of missiles, and look at Lebanon. Lebanon was supposed to basically stop having missiles imported after the last Lebanese war. That was the agreement. And now, the last Lebanese war, they started with some 10 or 15,000 missiles, and now they have 100,000 missiles in Lebanon facing Israel. So there's no such thing as demilitarization. If anyone's going to make a peace treaty on the assumption that the other side is going to follow and stay demilitarized, that person is a totally irresponsible leader.
Okay, I understand your position. I want to make sure you understand my question. My question is not, is it ever going to be a demilitarized state? I want to know what you see Abbas saying in Arabic, because what we're told all the time by people who believe in Mahmoud Abbas and who believe he is a partner for peace is that he has said, yes, I accept the notion of a demilitarized state in a two-state solution. And I'm asking you, have you ever heard him say that? Have you ever heard him say something to the contrary?
I certainly don't remember us ever seeing him saying that. And just in terms of the opposite, there's constant talk in the Palestinian media by Palestinian officials and leadership people about the need to be strong, the need to have the rifle, the need to keep training the rifle, the need to come back to the use of the rifle being an image for a symbol for militarization in general and for armaments in general. So I think it's something that we've never heard him say, and it's something that he would never even try to sell to his people.
Okay. Those who support Abbas point to his saying that he does not expect to ever return to his childhood home in Tzfat. Does Abbas accept the notion of a limited right of Palestinian return, which again, those who support him here in America say he has committed himself to that, and look, he even said he won't return to Safed. What is he saying about the Palestinian right of return in Arabic?
That example of his saying that he doesn't want to return to Safed is a perfect example that shows exactly how Abbas uses duplicity. He said that when he was being interviewed on Israeli television, and he asked him, the journalist asked him, what about, and in fact the journalist asked him, based on material we've been supplying to journalists for the last few years, he said to him, your media is constantly talking about returning to all the Israeli cities, and then he asked him specifically about Safed, about Tzfat. And what did he answer? He said, no, I want to visit there, but I know I don't want to live there because it's part of Israel. Well, the very next day, his spokesman, a person named Abu Rodena, got on had an interview with the official newspaper, and he said, what Mahmoud Abbas said was said only for Israeli consumption. That is not really the Palestinian Authority opinion. He said it explicitly. What he said was for Israeli consumption. And that is typical, two different messages to their own people. Of course, Safed is ours. And that's a constant message. It's not just that one statement of Abba Rodena. But in Hebrew, in English to Israelis or in English to Americans, he will come across as the most moderate, and he'll say whatever people want him to say.
All right, one more issue. Does Abbas say that Israelis will have the right to live on the West Bank in this new Palestinian state if they're willing to live under Palestinian sovereignty?
He's gone back and forth on this, but it's something that's even absurd to think about, because even when Israelis are controlling Judea and Samaria, and we're controlling the roads, Arabs regularly are throwing stones, and in fact, just last week there was a shooting at a car in Samaria. So it's not something that's really going to be feasible, and I think Mahmoud Abbas knows that. I know he has said on occasion he doesn't want even one Jew living there, and then later on he changed it. He meant an Israeli. He makes it clear, and it's not something that's even reasonable to think about, that there are going to be Jewish cities or Jewish people living amongst a Palestinian state.
So he has never said anything like Israeli settlements that are inside the West Bank, they're welcome to stay as long as they live under a Palestinian flag.
Oh, absolutely not. He has absolutely never said anything like that, and not even close to that.
Okay.
In fact, it's the opposite. Everything, Israelis have to leave or settlements have to be dismantled.
And does anybody ever ask him if Israel can have Palestinians living as Israeli citizens and is living simply in Israel, why can't Jews and Israelis live in your Palestinian state?
No one has ever asked him that. That was reported in the Palestinian media. And I have to tell you one other thing, though, about this whole discussion about Mahmoud Abbas and what does he actually believe. Let us say, for one example, for as a guess, that Mahmoud Abbas actually believes what he's saying in English to all of these people. Mahmoud Abbas is 79 years old. He's not going to be around very long as president of the Palestinian Authority or of the state of Palestine, if that's what they would create. The people who came after him would never hold on to any of these opinions, because that's not what they've been brought up to. There would be competition between people in the next elections to be who can be tougher against Israel, who could be more aggressive against Israel. And that, if you just look, for example, at the last election, the Palestinian Authority had Hamas won, both in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. An election after Israel would have gone back to territories close to the 67 ceasefire line, that is the pre-67 ceasefire line, would be so disastrous for Israel that you would have Palestinian political parties competing who is going to come with the hardest line toward Israel. And I would be very, very surprised if in the first or possibly second election afterward, Hamas would not win the elections again.
Itamar, I want you to understand sort of this, how at the moment it is so, A, it's wonderful to talk to you, but B, your view challenges so directly what we're hearing all the time from a segment of the American Jewish population. So, for example, if I sit with a Peter Beinart, if I listen to Jeremy Ben-Ami, if I listen to Ken Bob, they all say the following: I sat with Abbas. I talked to Abbas. You, Mark, you've never talked to Abbas. I've talked to Abbas. I've looked him in the eye. I've talked to him straight, one-on-one. This man is committed to a two-state solution, and it's Israel's responsibility to strengthen both Abbas personally and the peace movement that Abbas symbolizes, represents, so that we can achieve the two-state solution that all of us believe is the only way Israel can endure for generations and generations. If you were sitting at a table with Peter Beinart, Jeremy Ben-Ami, and Ken Bob, and they said that to you, what would you want to say back to them?
Okay, the greatest tragedies, some of the greatest tragedies in history have happened because people wanted desperately to believe tyrants who gave them offers of peace. We saw this with Chamberlain before World War II, where it was so clear. If you listen to the messages that Hitler was giving to his own people in German and then what he was saying in English, they were completely different. The Japanese were sitting and negotiating with the United States days before they bombed Pearl Harbor. Just because someone comes and gives you a peaceful message, that's not where you check to see if it's true. You check if it's the same messages that his controlled media is giving to the people. It's the same messages that his school books are giving to the children. It's the same messages that the children's programs on TV are giving. And since those messages are diametrically opposed to all those other messages, I absolutely will not believe what he's saying in English. I will only believe what's happening in Arabic. When we see those same messages in Arabic, we'll be thrilled and we'll be the first ones to report them. There's been a change in the Palestinian Authority. They really do want peace.
I understand completely. You understand it is a very bleak picture that you describe, because if you're right, it seems to me that there is no, at the moment, there is no peace partner for Israel to deal with. And one of the things that strikes me is, you're obviously a very bright guy, but I can't believe you're the brightest guy in all the world. And I don't understand why, number one, there aren't Israelis saying what you're saying loud and clear all the time on every media outlet that they can. And number two, the United States of America has Arabists who know Arabic. You can't be the only person who monitors the Palestinians' own website. Why do you think it is, Itamar, that your understanding of what Palestinians and what Abbas and what the PA is saying on their website to their own people does not seem to have any impact at all on American foreign policy or the way the American administration presents this issue? What's behind this?
First of all, just to be clear, we're not just monitoring their website. We're monitoring their school books. We're monitoring the television. We're monitoring their Facebook page. We're monitoring the leaders on their own personal Facebook pages. We're really monitoring everything about the Palestinian Authority to get a total sense. And it could just be that the whoever is doing the monitoring for the United States is just not doing it in a way that's giving them a proper picture. I mean, it's difficult for me to question what they're doing. What we do to make sure people understand that our conclusions are based on facts is we do put everything on the website. So, for example, if you'll go onto our website, you'll see that just a few weeks ago, the official newspaper of the Palestinian Authority, and I'm going to stress this because this is something that is so beyond belief that this is happening today. This is the official website of the official newspaper, Al-Hayat al-Jadida, of the Palestinian Authority. And this is what they wrote. They were writing this about the Gaza war, and they wrote as follows, that the crimes of these Israeli murderers who go too far with their crimes and whose God is called the Lord of hosts and demands, according to the protocols of the elders of Zion, that they offer him sacrifices during Passover in the form of matzah made from the blood of our children. Again, Al-Hayat al-Jadida, the editor-in-chief of this newspaper, was appointed by presidential decree a month ago by Mahmoud Abbas. Mm-hmm. And here he is having an article by one of the regular writers, which presents the protocols of the elders of Zion as an authentic book, authentic Jewish book, in which Jews are taught that they have to make matzah with the blood of Palestinian children, or Arab children, or Muslim children, whatever he meant there. So this is the kind of atmosphere that you have in the Palestinian Authority, official media, controlled by Abbas, and there's nothing that's going to make me blind myself to all this clear demonization, hatred, libels, terror glorification, which is a daily atmosphere in the official Palestinian media, just because Abbas comes to Jeremy, Ben David, or whoever it is, Ben Ami, and tells them something in English that he really wants peace.
Mm-hmm. By the way, you're in do you have children?
Yes, I do.
How many children?
5 children.
Are they in school?
My children are married right now, and I have 4 grandchildren.
Good. Your picture's on the screen. You look like a very young guy. It's amazing. Mazal tov to you. But they were in school, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, they went to school in Israel, yes, Itamar?
Yes.
Okay.
In Efrat, yes.
The people who are very much supportive of Mahmoud Abbas, whenever they hear that the Palestinian schools teach hate to their children, hate of Jews and hate of Israelis, they say Jewish schools do the same thing, that Israeli textbooks are also demonize Palestinians. To what extent have you found that to be true?
That is a totally false accusation. There is a little bit of stereotyping and possibly some discrimination that has been found in the books of the Haredi school systems. This was in a number of different reports. In fact, in a report that we did a number of years ago also on Israeli books, just to compare, we found the same thing. There were some problems with the Haredi. But I just want to give you another story, and this is critical, to let you know how Israelis have not been taught hatred of Arabs, and Israelis aren't hateful of Arabs. Last year, in the Voice competition in Israel, the two finalists were a young Israeli Jewish girl and a young Israeli Arab girl. I'll never forget this. I heard about this. I decided to watch it, and I'm watching on television. And they both had good voices. The Arab girl had a better voice. I mean, they both had great voices. And then you're watching the home viewers voting. You're watching the home viewers voting, and the two things are going up, and all of a sudden you see a big, big spike, and the Arab girl won. And then, of course, there was tremendous cheering and, like ticker tape parade, ticker tape flying all over the place. Israeli home viewers on The Voice, which was a very popular program, had no problem voting for an Arab girl who had a better voice than the Israeli girl, than the Israeli Jewish girl. And that's what's beautiful about Israel, that in spite of all the hatred that's coming from the Palestinians toward us, and coming from many Israeli Arabs toward us, Israeli Jews were willing at home to vote for an Arab girl who wanted to represent Israel as the voice of Israel. And they had no problem. So whoever is claiming that we're teaching hatred, it's not true, and whoever is claiming that the Israeli population hates Arabs or discriminates against Arabs, it's definitely not true on a global national basis. There might be individual cases, but those are the exception. Israeli people are not racist.
Okay. By the way, after the death of the 3 Israeli teens, and then a Palestinian teen was kidnapped, and obviously we know he was brutally murdered, one of the things that, again, those who are supportive of Mahmoud Abbas say is that there now were hundreds of people, hundreds of young people, chanting in the street in a sort of like in a demonstration, death to Arabs or kill the Arabs. To what extent do you feel that among the younger Israeli generation, there isn't the kind of perspective that you have, and maybe even your adult children have, but that among younger Israelis, they're just worn down, and now there is spreading a new kind of anti-Arab, racist hatred, which had been, as far as I could tell, virtually unknown to Israel in the past?
I think that you cannot judge, first of all, an entire Israeli population by a very, very small fringe, and you certainly can't judge them after 3 young Israelis were kidnapped and murdered and brutally murdered. And not only were they brutally murdered, not only were they kidnapped, but the Palestinian Authority, the Fatah, and we were publicizing this, the Fatah was celebrating this. If you look on the Fatah Facebook page during this period, and again, this is the official Fatah Facebook page, during this period, they were having, they created the 3-fingered salute, and each of the fingers represented one of the Israelis. The official newspaper of the Palestinian Authority, this was during the World Cup, and the symbol of the World Cup is 3 hands holding, forming a globe together. So the official newspaper had 3 hands forming a globe, but in each hand was a struggling child. This is Mahmoud Abbas's newspaper, was grabbing a struggling child. So this was happening in the Palestinian Authority. So you ended up having a small percentage of Jews who were calling for revenge. So that's a response to something very, very specific. That's not something that's happening all the time. But if you're talking about glorifying terrorism or glorifying violence against the other ethnic group, let me just tell you something. Mahmoud Abbas has glorified more terrorists, who've killed more Israelis than just about any Israeli has. Mahmoud Abbas recently, when a person, for example, Issa Abdrabal, was released from prison. Issa Abdrabal came up to two university students about, 25 years ago, saw them sitting in a forest, and he went up to them, took his gun. First he tied them up, and then he shot them both in the head. He was recently released from prison. Mahmoud Abbas hugged him, picked up his hand, and they both held their hands in V together. Now, Abbas knows what he did. He knows that he murdered two university students. Why? And then he called him a hero. And the other terrorists who were released, he called heroes. So this is Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas is telling his people that killing Israeli civilians, teenagers and university students, turns Palestinians into heroes. So anyone who's going to tell me that Mahmoud Abbas is a moderate, just look at what he says and does amongst his own people and not what he does in the United States.
Itamar, just one more question for you, and I want to play a clip from Fareed Zakaria's GPS program on CNN this past Sunday when his guest was Hillary Clinton. And at one point, Hillary explains that from her perspective, her biggest problem with Israel is its settlement policy. Sloan, I'd like to play that clip, and you'll hear it, Itamar, but I want our audience to see Hillary Clinton this past Sunday on CNN.
This is my biggest complaint with the Israeli government. I am a strong supporter of Israel, strong supporter of their right to defend themselves. But the continuing settlements, which have been denounced by successive American administrations on both sides of the aisle, are clearly a terrible signal to send if at the same time you claim you're looking for a two-state solution.
Basically, Itamar, what you hear is America blaming the settlement policy of Israel as one of the major obstacles to peace. In 30 seconds, what's your sense of the entire settlement question, and to what extent is Hillary A, right? To what extent is she wrong?
According to the Oslo Accords, according to UN Resolution 242, settlements are legal until there is a decision against them being legal. According to the Oslo Accords, Israel is continuing and can continue to build settlements until there's some final status agreement that would make some change. Now, that's the law. That's what was signed. That's what was agreed on. The Palestinian Authority has never, ever been willing to accept an agreement. They'll sign something with Israel, they'll make an agreement with Israel, and then they'll demand things that weren't in the agreement. If the Palestinian Authority is ever going to be trusted, they're going to have to follow the agreements. And if they think that settlements are improper or unethical, which I completely disagree with, then bring it up at negotiations and wait till negotiations are over. Don't say that those are preconditions, because then what's the point of negotiations?
Itamar, Marcus, it has been wonderful, wonderful to talk to you. We have to do it often. You bring a perspective which we rarely get to hear. Again, I know it's very, very late in Israel. Thank you for going out of your way to spend some time with us. We will talk often.
Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Itamar.
Good day.
Itamar Marcus, who heads Palestinian Media Watch. Be sure you check it out. Stay tuned for a fabulous interchange that comes up in a moment between Brett Stevens of the Wall Street Journal and Roger Cohn of the New York Times from the 2014 AJC Global Conference. And then see my conversation with a fascinating individual, Qasim Hafiz, a Muslim Zionist on L'chaim. We'll be playing this hour for you at 2 a.m. tonight and tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. I hope you're with us then. As always, my thanks to those who helped put this program together, Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, Dara Golub, and our producer, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.